is how to maximize business support for what you do. And I'm going to zip through a little bit of context here, but mostly we want to hear from the people on the panel. And the people on the panel are members of our National BILT team, the Business and Industry Leadership Team. As you go through this, think about it as Business Advisory Council on steroids. That's what it really is. I'm going to introduce them first. Lynn Windrick is emeritus from the innovation part of Dell, but also a futurist and resident for Interlink, which is a group that sits between education and industry, and he's also an author. Kim Yohannan is with the education group of Palo Alto Networks, and she is in charge of what's called our National Visiting Committee. It's a review committee that reviews what we do in our grant every year. Erin Burciaga is with Analytics to Go in the Washington, D.C. area, data analytics. Susan Cofield is with Education with the VMware Corporation. Matt Glover is our current chair for our BILT, and he is CTO for a company called Lavelle Brands. And you want to pick his brain too, because he has all the IT for a $600 million corporation in the cloud. Nobody has an office, an official office, other than maybe they're for better, something like that. And to Win, I have no idea exactly what your title is. He works for Comerica Bank. He is a vice president that somehow includes IT and other things. And mostly, if you want to find two, you find him in an airport. So I've found him in an airport numerous times. These people are the reason we can do what we do. First of all, there's a fact that we think our graduates are great, and the businesses don't agree. The percentages do differ, but one of them, 96% of us think our people are ready for the workforce. And in this survey, only 11% of the business people did. That's kind of a big difference in those percentages. But I think we can all agree that we want students to graduate and get a job. And we want businesses that are highly engaged and ready to hire our graduates when they get to that point. So we developed this through the National Convergence Technology Center in the early 2000s, based on some work that I'd actually done at Richland College in the 1990s. And in effect, the BILT model ensures that college curricula is aligned not with what businesses want to hire today, but with what they predict they want to hire 12 to 36 months in the future. We always ask them to get their crystal ball out and polish it off really good, so that when we work with them on our detailed meeting each year, we are able to get from them what knowledge, skills, and abilities they really envision they're going to want to hire in the future. It is, in fact, a business advisory council, but it's not just advice. When someone gives you advice, do you take it? Advice is cheap. Okay, well, in our situation, we're putting the business and industry leadership team in a co-leadership role. Not only do we have to take or consider the advice we are given, we must give them feedback on it so that they know what we could and couldn't do. Sometimes they've come up with things they wanted us to do that didn't work, or that we couldn't do in education. But most of the time we were able to figure it out, and then as a national center, we transmit the information across the country to, at this point, 73 colleges and universities officially, and others that use our information that we don't know that they even do. There are some essential elements of the BILT, and rather than me just telling you what those are, what I'm doing is I'm asking the panel, why do we do some of the things we do? Because I think that's important. It's not just do it without a reason, like your mother said. My mother used to tell me, do it because I said so. There's usually a why that makes a lot of sense and is really valid. So why do we focus on a single subdiscipline on our BILT at a time? For example, we don't consider all different computing careers at the same time on this BILT. Why do we do that? Okay, you guys. Somebody has to talk.
I'll start to warm up the room for the others here. Is when you try to focus on too many things, the old phrase of boiling the ocean, you get a tiny bit of progress, but not even noticeable in most cases. When you can focus it in on a specific discipline in a specific area, you can do some very important things. For example, we have about 20 very active members and 50-some members overall from business. When we get together for our quarterly meetings, when we start talking about what is going to change, we don't talk about things that are going to change manufacturing if we're working on a cybersecurity certification program. We talk about what's changing in cybersecurity, or in IT, or in cloud, or hybrid cloud, which is the ones we're working on now. But then you can drive it down, and the businesses have all learned over the years, and I've been involved for, I think, over 15, 16 years, maybe 17 years.
I think it's more like 18.
Does everybody know the phrase KSAs? Knowledge, skills, and abilities? We don't ask businesses to tell us what courses they need. We ask them what knowledge, skills, and abilities do you need graduates to have, and our teachers will go out and put it into the right course at the right time. And maybe in 5 different courses it'll show up. By doing that, that focus and that laser guidance gives us the ability to create workforce-ready graduates.
Yeah, people we'd actually like to hire. I mean, the entire intent of having laser-like focus on subgroups is, to Glenn's earlier point, if we focused on everything, we'd get nothing done. But if we focus specifically on cybersecurity or network engineering, cloud, whatever those elements are, it allows us as a group to think smarter and be able to make a decision. We have to think nationally as a national BILT. You guys may have regional BILTs or regional advisory groups. It's important for each of us to think about not just what it would impact my own company, but what would impact the nation as a whole, because my needs are going to be different than the nation's needs. And so that's another very important element that we have to do, and that's why we focus so critically in each area before we move on to the next. There are some times that we don't agree. And that's okay. And that's okay, because the people who are passionately providing their position, what we do then is we put together what we call a tiger team. And it'll be a smaller group of the passionate people who get together and work it out on what they think is the recommendation to give back to the larger body, so that we can get through even those tougher areas of lack of understanding, misunderstanding, or just disagreement in general.
There's one other comment I'm going to make. Whoops, can't do it that way. This won't work. If you think about IT, there are so many different facets of IT. With the exception of some of the people on the stage, no one can be an expert in all things. So our IT, our BILT primarily focuses on infrastructure, communications, a little bit of security. It does not necessarily focus, for example, on careers in project management, though we talk about that. It does not necessarily focus on careers in software engineering, though we talk about that as well. I'm actually the lead for another grant, which is the IT Skills Standards grant, that is using this BILT model individually for different skill clusters, where we have the subject matter experts come together on a particular skill cluster, like infrastructure, like tech support, like project management, like software engineering, et cetera, and data. Anyway, bottom line is we're separating it down so that we have subject matter experts that are really, really, really experts in a given area, even though they happen to maybe know more or a little bit more about other areas. Is that fair?
I think it's fair, and I think it's actually really important. So I had a chance to join the recent IT skills meeting that we had in Texas, and for me it was a great moment, because oftentimes we talk about a lot of these IT skills in aggregate, and we don't break them apart and appreciate the different knowledge, skills, and abilities that should be decoupled from a data scientist and a data engineer. And we got into the nitty-gritty details. It was day long. It was exhausting. But it was an important conversation, and I would really say good government, to his point, that then we were able to organize some tiger teams that went out and investigated or explored a few points that we couldn't really come to agreement consensus on. But the product of that is going to be a more well-defined differentiation of different skills and standards expected in different roles, as opposed to, hey, you're in IT, you need to know all of it. And you get to the problem that we have today of jack of all trades, master of none, and especially as a young professional, that's not boding well for those who are graduating school early on.
Okay, why do we vote? And how does voting work?
So voting is is wildly important. It gives each of the members a voice, right? It's important and we have a voting process where we have numbers. You vote from 1 to 5, something that's very, 1 to 4. Something that's very important will be 4, something that's not as important would be a 1. And what we're finding is that there are many skills that educators would love to teach the students, but there's only so many credit hours that can be taught. So once we go through and we vote on every KSA that's out there, then we have the ability to go, okay, well, we have only this many hours to educate folks. How many of the skills actually can be taught within those credit hours? And then that gives us a list. It looks like everything that's below 1.5 in a voting isn't going to make the curriculum. Or maybe it's everything below 2 or everything below 2.5. And then that makes it so that the students that are graduating are people that I would want to hire because they're getting the most important things that we rated the highest, the things that are at 4s and 3.5s and 3.8s, make it so we're giving the students the very best that they can possibly bring to the table for a employer to go and say, I'm hiring this person because they have these skills.
We actually average their votes. We tally up individual votes of the 4s and the 3s and the 2s and the 1s. And it averages the votes, and that's where those numbers come from that Matt is referring to at this point.
There's an important nuance, though, is if you have, say, 20 people voting, and 15 voted a 4, and 5 of them voted a 1, we don't just average them together and say, okay, that's a 3. We stop and say, well, why do you think it's a 1? And we might find there's 5 people that are from small and mid-sized business that they have to outsource those tasks because they don't have the talent in-house to do them. So that task isn't important for them. But that's important to know depending on who are you training these students for? Is it only for the HPs and the Dells and the large corporations of the world? Or is it also for that mid-sized local business? So you need to know those type of things also to take it into account. You may have some courses that are more designed to a IT shop where you only have 1 or 2 IT people in the whole company.
It's
also important.
Yeah, it's also important to note that not everybody votes. So we ask the members to only vote on things that they're knowledgeable about. We don't want people to vote just because they're voting. So there may be a knowledge, skill, and ability that's specifically in network engineering. If there are people on staff, maybe it's a futurist, maybe it's a social author resource that's really important, some of the soft skills, but that person does not have to vote in network engineering if that's not what they know and not what they should do. So when we do the average, it's an average of the voters. So if 25 people are voting normally, and that's 100%, but on one KSA, only 17 people voted, it's going to be the average of the 17.
Why do we have faculty cross-reference your prioritized KSAs with existing curriculum to identify gaps? Why do we involve faculty in that? Why do you not do that? 2. You haven't spoken, it's your turn.
Well, thank you, ma'am. Well, the faculty involvement is really a crucial part of that KSA process for one reason, for many reasons, because they are the one that actually teaching these skills. They're the one that give, direct feedback. Remember what Matt and Clint just said, that the grading that's what we drive from the grading to the curriculum. And some of the skills may be obsolete that the educators may not be aware of. COBOL programmers may be the greatest, 20 years ago, but not so applicable now, right? So those you see the disconnect, and let's say let educators there, to listen to the industry thought leaders, and when we go through the grading process.
I would also add, like, in this industry, we have to constantly be learning and evolving. If the faculty aren't involved and you're not educating them, then they also may have to upskill and get new skills to be able to teach the students. They have to be comfortable doing it first before they actually teach it to the students, too.
And really important, the 2 of us are actually, when Ann mentioned that we're not just advisors, we're actively involved in helping to lead. We're on the Tiger team right now, And we came up with a meeting, I don't know how many months ago, and it said hybrid cloud is becoming more and more important, not just multi-cloud or single clouds. Well, we need to look at a course. So we said, what if we made it a capstone course? Well, as part of that capstone course, we picked a couple of pieces of architecture, safe architecture, and a project management tool used by all three of the industry people was Trello. And we have a good feeling there's a lot of teachers out there that don't know those tools. So as part of like, I'm in with Ernie at 1:15 today. Ernie, what's your session called? Is Ernie still back there? Oh, he stepped out. Must have known I was going to call him. It's at 1:15 today, Ernie Friends, and it's around cloud. And I'm going to talk about for 15 minutes to all the people in the room, since they're listening on cloud, about hybrid cloud and what we're building into the capstone course, what we've done so far as in terms of scenarios, and then what we're still working on. And then there's going to be a call for help. If that's a course you think you might want to teach, do you have some input? We're going to have a sign-up sheet where we can take names down. We can ask people, do you have any input? Did we miss anything? Would you like to review the first draft when we send it out? So that we can involve the teachers and they go, well, yeah, I don't have a clue what the safe architecture is. Well, we'll make sure maybe in a future working connections or in a webinar, we teach safe architecture to a level that they can pass it on to their students. Because if you're not staying up with what the tools are being used in industry, then you're not helping your students get a job when the customer, when the hiring employer says, and do you have any familiarity with what your role would be in a safe architecture? And you go, yes, I will be very safe. I'll be very, very safe. You might not get that job.
Yes, just for one clarification that the instructor is not involved in the voting process. The votes don't count. So making sure you clarify that.
Yeah,
I
they
think-
don't vote, but they need to be in the room and listen to the
Yes.
discussion. Because among other things, if we have 4s and 2s, maybe, on a particular item, it can be just a semantics misunderstanding. So, if you just took the number, this is why we don't do it through email. That and the fact that if I sent the surveys out through email in advance, if something comes up in their crisis du jour at work, it's easier for them to say they're not coming. We don't just take the votes, because the numbers alone are not the whole story. It's also the discussion that's there. So faculty do need to be there.
Well,
for that.
I'd like to add one more thing. So
Okay.
I love the fact that faculty are in the room. And I don't like them being silent observers, although that's a critical, important element to them understanding where the business is coming from. The whole point of the process is to figure out what the business leaders are hiring and what the skills those business leaders need so that they can help get those college students equipped to get those jobs, which I find fascinating. But there are critical elements that I find in doing this for this many years is that there are blockers. The faculty sometimes are the largest antagonists in the process. And if you have them in the room and they can hear what the business is saying, it starts to erode that antagonism. It starts to go, oh, well, these guys are actually here not to grandstand or say I'm so good. They're here for the students. And I'm here for the students. So you guys are all focused, whether it's BILT members or whether it's educators, they're all focused on the same objective, and that's equipping our students for the workforce. And once you've eroded that barrier, one of the biggest things I love, many of the faculty that I go into give me hugs as soon as I walk into the room. And they're just like, oh, Matt, it's good to see you. And that's important because they also have the ability to raise their hand and ask a question and say, well, what do you mean by that? Or, hey, Glenn, you said this. How do you think I'm supposed to put that in the curriculum? So their gears are spinning in their minds on how to best equip the students as well. And I find that the most valuable way, instead of having a BILT team by itself making decisions and co-leading without faculty, I think is a disaster. So.
Okay, why is it important for faculty to give you feedback after they've done their cross-referencing? I don't know about you, but I have been on advisory councils where we poured out our hearts and gave them our absolute best. We came back in a year and nothing was done. That wasn't particularly exciting for me, feeling like I was appreciated. What about you guys?
Yeah, I'll lead that. If Ann asked me to come do this, and we do it 4 times a year, okay? If Ann asked me to come do, and I do extracurricular themes that are outside, like I'm here today, right? If Ann asked me to do this 4 times a year, and my advice, or the advice of the people I'm leading, is not taken, I wouldn't be doing it anymore. Because it's not valuable. If I'm not adding value, or I don't feel like the value I'm adding is actually being taken, then there's no point in me coming at all. So just be mindful if you have your own advisory teams and you're not taking their advice, you're going to have massive turnover. There are going to be people, because I've got better things to do with my time.
And I do agree with Matt. You know, the panelists here, they are very busy in their own right. We travel like madman every day, or lady, every day or every week. But the thing is that, you know, I have been involved with the CTC for almost 15 years since the beginning. And yeah, I believe in this mission. I believe that from the industry, sometimes there's a gap that we need to fill. And that's why we're here, and that's why our feedback and listen to educators or faculties, you know, the challenges and the students. At the end of the day, you want to make sure that we teach the skills that are marketable. These are the ones that the workforce demand. And when they get out of the program, 2 years program, 4 years program, they are, you know, in the marketplace.
So what happens if we give you feedback and we say, you wanted 10 things, and here's this 10th thing we can't do? What happens on that? Because we can't always just bend over backwards and do everything they want, but it hasn't worked out that way. What happens?
Maybe a charter team, too, could be.
Could be a tiger.
Could be a charter. I mean,
Yeah,
sometimes you take it offline, depending on what it is, what the ask
okay.
is. Sometimes,
Maybe we don't have adjuncts to teach a particular area. What happens? Matt? You can help me.
So there's some interesting elements that have happened over the years that I find fascinating. We'll give requirements that we'd really like to see them happen. And Kim does a great job of kind of laying it all out in the National Visiting Committee on what are the improvements we'd like to see. But what's fascinating is the people on Ann's team and the leadership that her and her team provide. They can't always do everything that we need them to do. But what I love about it is their creativity of they focus on what is the mission? What is it that Matt and company said that they needed us to do? And they'll say, well, we couldn't do exactly what you wanted, but we did this, this, and this to try and make up for that. And I love that creative explosion that they do on their own. And at the very next NVC, they'll lay out, here's all the things that we did do. And I find their out-of-the-box thinking and appreciation for what the goal, what the mission was, not the directive, but what the mission was, is astounding.
Sometimes the limitation is they want too much that it won't fit in 60 hours. We're down to 60 semester hours. We have to negotiate with them, what are you going to take off? Sometimes they want us to teach something that in reality I know, and again, we're national and we disseminate this nationally. Sometimes they'll want something that I'm just sure that most of the colleges in the U.S. won't be able to do because they don't have the equipment. How do we handle that sort of thing? There's all sorts of things. It's a dialogue back and forth. And when I say that the business people vote, they do. They're the only votes. But that doesn't mean that the faculty that are sitting in the room are any less valuable. It means that they are acting as active listeners and questioners, and it's a team, it's a collaborative effort. I think we can probably start calling this an ecosystem.
Yeah.
After this morning, I think we certainly should do that.
Let me add to what Matt was saying and what Ann just highlighted. You know, I'm excited to be working with Ann a lot on the data science and the data engineering standards, analytics, and I'm actually really excited. Tomorrow, come to the keynote. I have 2 really senior leaders at very important cloud and analytics companies also joining me, and we're starting to develop a good, thorough conversation in the data engineering, the data science space, and what can go on at the colleges. What is great about helping Glenn and Matt and Kim and all of us develop these standards is it also helps me control not only from industry, but as well from government, understand what can be done and manage my expectations. So I'm not going to necessarily get the employee that I want, but I'll get the employee that I need to at least accomplish the mission. I like what you said, accomplish the mission, not necessarily the directive. What can we do together in a symbiotic relationship, and then continue to raise the bar on each other.
I'm going to give an example, and I'll let Aaron finish it. You're on the hook now. But we started talking about data science probably 2 years ago. And everybody said, well, data science, the person who does their job is called a data scientist. And they have PhDs or they have master's degrees with 10 years of experience, and we're a community college, and that doesn't fit. And Aaron voiced up, and I'll let you do the details on it, but said, well, for every data scientist, do you know how many people are on that team that are not data scientists? So could you share with them some of those numbers or things you brought up about people that do visualization and data mining?
Yeah. On an average team that I have, and again, I've led analytics at Accenture. I was the vice president of data science AI at Booz Allen, and I have my own company, Analytics to Go, and another company called Data Prime. On those teams that I have, a small tiger team that we put in for data science is 5. One of the 5 people is a data scientist. The rest are data journalists, data engineers, a strategist, and a domain expert. And for me, that's the opportunity we have in industry and the opportunity we have in national security, because I'm also a Marine reservist. I was 12 years Marine Corps. I still advise Joint Chiefs and other generals, commandants, deputy commandants. That is how we have to weaponize skill. And we cannot do it through 4-year and 6-year and 8-year program. We have to, as a country, it is a national security issue to look down to our colleges and see how can we get data journalists, how can we get data engineers, especially at the 2-year colleges. And that's the opportunity that I'm really excited about, and actually have articles coming out in Proceedings and Harvard Business Review and more with you all talking about this precise thing, not only in industry, but especially in those Lance Corporals and other enlisted folk that are going to be augmenting the data scientists that will be officers. We're actually calling for new rank structure.
Yeah, it's really interesting. That brought up a different benefit of the BILT that I love. So each one of us have our own passions on what we're doing in life and why we're part of the BILT. Any one of us have a different way of working, right? So he just walked you through the fact that he's a veteran. I'm a veteran. So one of the things that I'm passionate about is equipping veterans in STEM. This is one of those mechanisms, one of those venues that I get to equip veterans. But I'm also, as a CTO, the biggest travesty that I see right now in America is we do not have enough women and we do not have enough minorities in STEM fields. But IT is not IT like it was in the 80s, where we were all propeller heads, and we just worked on mainframes with dumb terminals. That was okay for them to all be white guys. That's fine. The problem that we have today is that IT is social, and it's so much bigger. It's IT for everyone. So you have to have diversity within the IT team. So when you have a business problem, you're not applying a specific white man's version of the solution to everybody. What you do is you bring it in and you go, okay, well, how does this work for this minority group? How does this work for veterans? How does this work for, and you get different perspectives. And if you as an IT leader don't equip your team, that's something that I'm passionate about. The problem is whether you're passionate about it or not, if there's not enough people to actually hire, you end up with, in most IT shops across America, you're going to end up with basically a big group of white men and another group of Indian men. That's pretty much what IT looks like across the United States. And so when you think about it from that perspective, and you're like, well, we're applying a technological solution, and I used this example before, but there was a class that one of our colleges ran, and it was a mobile app development class. And the mobile app development class, they had 1 week to design an app and 1 week to build it, and then they all voted on who won. And the particular professor who was pushing it on, he goes, I put all of these app things out in pink flyers to get only girls to come to this app boot camp. Well, he said 50% of the people who came were still guys. And,
They were
so-
after the girls.
yeah, they wanted more women in this group, but 50% of them came in as guys. But a team of 4 girls won that summer camp, and they invented a app that they could take their phone out, take a picture of their fingernail, and then apply different designs to their fingernail before actually doing it, right? And that was the clincher for me in my brain to go, in a million years, if you locked me in a room, I would never in my man brain come up with an app that could do that. And then I thought to myself, as a CTO of this organization, what harm am I doing by not equipping my team with that capability? How damaging am I doing to my organization, and quite frankly, what are we doing to America by not having women in that space? And then people like Ann then know that I'm passionate about that. She's asked me to come, they have a Working Connections, she's asked me to come speak to women about this very problem, right? And so that's some of the other capabilities that you get from BILTs that you may not get from an advisory group.
Susan, why do we meet more than once a year?
Why do we meet more than once a year?
Yeah.
You mean the in-person meeting?
Yeah, no, just the bill. Why do we get together more than once a year? Susan and I go way, way back, and we're friends from 20 years ago. However, if you just met someone new and you meet them one time, how well do you think they're going to respond when you call on them to do something for you?
Well, it's important to meet on a more regular basis so you can really form your advisory board like you have done. And we are getting to know people, and relationships are so important. So I commend what y'all have done, definitely, with the BILT.
Thanks. Okay, why is it important to talk about trends? By the way, we have one big long meeting. Yeah, it was a day this year. By the way, I've gotten that down to where we can get out at 2 o'clock. Anyway, a day meeting a year, and then the other 3 meetings that we do per year are all using Zoom now. And on those Zoom meetings, we start off with, usually the chair seeds it. Glenn did it when he was chair, and Matt is doing it now, with what they see coming down the pipeline that's new. And a lot of it is some of the same kind of information that Todd talked about this morning in the keynote, right? Why are we talking about trends? How fast are your colleges at putting new curriculum in? Okay, we don't have to talk about this